Thank you very much, Anne, and I want to thank all of you for being here today and for inviting me here. I was here last week for IAPS, and when I was invited to come and share a presentation demo for you, I had to think, because I would have to spend a whole nother week here in New Mexico. And so I thought, well, I don't know, do I want, of course. And I got a couple of my friends and twisted their arm, who wasn't hard to do. So we just got back from a wonderful week in Taos. By the way, we stay at a place called Casa Gallina. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but if you haven't, check it out. The owner, Richard, is wonderful. He will spoil you, and you don't even have to leave. You can paint, and you've got a bathroom, you've got your kitchen, and it's wonderful. So thank you for having me and giving me that opportunity to get to stay on for another week. And it was wonderful. And before I start, this is the banker's clasp, I guess they call it. And what I do is, what I like to use them for is mainly for plein air, to attach I use two, to attach my paper. That way I don't have to carry around tape and waste a lot of tape. And for plein air, I basically do very fast studies, field studies. So it's just real easy to move them around. So I like it. I also use it as a painting tool. And I'm going to demonstrate that in my painting today. So all kinds of little goodies, and I have to find out what your eraser tool is that you're all talking about. I don't know that, so I'll have to maybe I'll have to buy one of your erasers and give that a try. But as Ann said, the topic for today's demo and presentation is how to loosen up and add spice to your paintings. And this is actually one of my favorite things to talk about, because I often, when I teach it home in Marietta in my studio, and I have artists come and say, I want to loosen up. I'm too tight. I want to be a little more free and expressive. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. I will be blogging about this, and you will get credit. So that's very exciting. It's the little things, you know. But so how to loosen up? And so I had to figure out ways to explain the way I paint, because that's what people wanted to know. Well, how do you do that? For me, I think what has happened is through the daily painting. And I'll just let me expand for just a minute on what happened with the daily painting and how I got involved with that. I was working full-time when I first discovered Pastel, and I was very frustrated with the progress I was making, which was very slow. And I had a friend ask me, well, how often do you paint? And I said, well, once a week when I go to class. And then I leave my pastel box in the car and for the following week class. No, that's not good enough. If you want to get better, you've got to practice. You've got to put in the time at the easel. You have to put in the miles of canvas, as they say, or paper in our case. So she challenged me to paint, I think it was 20 or 25 small 5x7 paintings she said, set a timer, like 15, 20 minutes at the most. And I thought, well, I can do that. I can do that during my lunch break. And that's what I started doing. And what I discovered is, after that month, that I could see improvement. It was very obvious. I was becoming more comfortable with the medium. I was exploring more. Paper, I wasn't afraid of it anymore. It wasn't precious, because I knew I could do another one the next day. So the painting every day, and then I started blogging about it. That was just to keep me focused on the idea that I wanted to keep this up. This was working for me. I think my style has evolved because of those small, fast paintings. Because I had to find a way to simplify my subject matter in very quick time. I had a family daycare. So I knew I had probably a window of 30 minutes that everyone would be at nap time, sleeping. And if I didn't get my painting in, I would be exhausted at the end of the day. So I think my style has evolved because of that approach. And so whenever someone says to me, well, what can I do to get better? I always say, well, you've got to paint more and try doing some faster daily studies. And that will really, it's one of the tips that I like to say will really help you if you want to loosen up. Now, I want to clarify, what do I mean by loosening up? Because I know sometimes people have different ideas about what that means. And so if I were, you help me out here, if I were to ask you, what does it mean if someone says, I want to paint loosely or loosen up? What are some of what does that bring to mind?
Broad strokes.
All right, the strokes, the way you make your marks. Yes.
Opening up your creativity.
Okay, very good.
Less detail.
Less detail, more suggestion.
No tans.
What's that?
No tans.
Oh, yes, okay. No tans.
Who?
Well, usually for me, and so that you know where I'm coming from, what I think of it is meaning painting with more expression, where you interpret the subject and you don't render it in every detail. In other words, I'm not photorealistic painter. I'm somewhere in the middle. You have pure abstract all the way to photorealism, and I guess I would say I'm somewhere in the middle. And so some of the ideas that I think about when I think of loose is a painting that is fresh, not overworked, not overdone, spontaneous, something that looks like it was easy, but as we know, it's not always that easy. Every painting, whether it's loose or whether it's a photorealistic painting or whether it's abstract, all have to have the basics of a good painting. Attention to the composition, attention to the value, attention to the drawing, the colors you use. So for me, I like to say more that I don't paint loose, but I paint with more expression, and I try to interpret my subject and leave a lot of mystery rather than put in every single detail. So that's what I want to talk about. How do you get to that, and how do you make that a part of your paintings if that's what you're trying to do? And for me, I have it's my personal secret. This is what helps me. And it guides me no matter what I want to paint, whether it's a wildflower painting or a marsh painting or whatever. I like to paint all landscapes, by the way. Wildflowers are kind of my specialty. That's the thing I'm drawn most to. But I really love all different landscapes. But the secret for me is this. I make a plan, but then I plan to let go. So I have a plan in place. That's my roadmap. And that gives me permission to let go and be more expressive and paint with more passion and put my emotions into it because I have a plan. And then I can sort of slip into that more intuitive zone where I can let what I've learned come into play. So I'm going to start the demo and talk about how I make a plan and how I put that into practice. And then when I'm finished with the demo, if I think our time will allow, I want to talk about some of the things that I do to help me continue in this idea of painting with more expression or loose. So I'm going to put these down for the moment and start on my painting. Now, starting with a plan. Every time I say this, if I have a group of students and I say, okay, we're going to make a plan. How many of you do thumbnails before you paint? Yeah. I don't raise my hand because I'm not very good at doing that. I'll tell you when I do it, when I go to a workshop and the instructor says, all right, we're going to do our thumbnails. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it. And then I maybe keep up with it for a little while. But what I have discovered is taking the time to actually do them, even if they're just something very quick, helps me. And so I have found ways to simplify that process. And a lot of artists, when I talk to them about making a plan, they'll say, well, but I don't want to take time planning because it will ruin the spontaneity. I will get tired of my subject before I even start. And my thought is just the opposite. If I have direction and I know where I'm going with the painting, it's easier to be more creative or just respond to the painting and let things evolve. So having a plan. Plans can take time, or they can be something quick. One of the ways that I really like to do a plan is on a little dry erase board. And I call this a why board, as in, why am I painting this? And by the way, these Dollar Tree. So they're $1. They're great. I use them all the time. I use them as this why board, as I'm going to show you, but I also use it to help resolve a painting. Then it becomes a what board. And it's really good because, you get to a point in a painting, and actually I'm going to talk about this more when I get there, and you don't exactly know what to do, so you just keep fiddling with it. And before you know it, you've finished it off. That's what we say in seven. You don't just finish, you finish it off. So the whiteboard helps because you write down exactly what you want to do or what you want to pay attention to. And then that way, if you're like me, I would forget. I would look and say, oh yeah, I need to fix that, and then I forget. But write it down, you won't forget. The whiteboard helps me plan the painting. So the first thing I do is ask myself, why am I painting this scene? So let's go through the plan. This is what I'll be painting today. And it's this really, well, you have a camera. Yeah, where is it? I'm not used to that. I'm not used to that. So it's a really, really bad little tiny photograph. Now, I like working from bad, terrible photographs. Now, I love plein air painting, but I will say that probably 90% of my paintings are done from photographs. And the reason why is because I don't live out here where it's beautiful. I live in the land of green in Atlanta, Georgia, and there you cannot hardly see the sky. And so if you don't like painting trees up close, it's you're limited.
Like living in a tunnel.
It is. I love to come out here where I can see the sky. But I do work from photos, but I work from my own photos, and this is actually one of my tips. Working from small photos, these are contact size that I just print all together, then I cut them apart. And one thing that's very important is they are my own photos. I was there, I took them. So that way I can interpret them because I have all those feelings about the place. So I always work from my own photos. And I don't care if they're perfect because I want to have permission to make them better. If they're crummy, I'm not going to copy them. I can only go and improve them. I'm not afraid to move things around and to try to make it a better composition. So small, tiny photos where I can't see detail allows me to suggest detail rather than try to put in every blade of grass or every leaf. So this is what I'll be working from today. So my why. I have to ask myself, why am I painting this? All right. What I like about this is the golden glow on the grass, that just kind of that flash of light on the grass. This is a marsh scene, by the way. And those of you who at IAPS met Stan Spurlack or saw his demo, this is his farm in New Jersey. If you ever have the chance to go, it's gorgeous. But that's what I'll be doing. But that's what I'm drawn to. So I would write that down on my whiteboard. Why am I painting this? That will help keep me on track so that I won't lose sight of what's important to me. And then I will go on, and sometimes I'll give it a working title. And that's another device that I use to help me stay focused. So let me just think. I'm not real good at titles, but let's just say Afternoon Flash. All right, that's what it is. That, though, will remind me what I'm trying to go for in the painting. The next step of the planning stage is to do a very quick thumbnail, a black and white thumbnail. Now, if I do it on the whiteboard, it's a no tan. It's black and white. I want to be able to get grayscale dry erase markers. If you know of any source, I've looked, I can't find them, but that would be ideal because then you could do it very quickly. But since I don't have that, what I do is I use grayscale markers, and these are Prismacolor, and I have handouts up here if you're interested in exactly what I'm using today. It's all on the handout, the numbers and all this that I use. The idea behind the black and white thumbnail is to simplify the scene into just a few big, simple shapes. All right? I see a lot of different tree trunks and branches and leaves, but I want to simplify it. So the idea behind this is that I am building the foundation to my house, okay? The way I like to look at it is I like to decorate. That's the fun part, like bringing in the furniture, painting the walls, hanging the artwork. But unless we build the foundation and build the house and put up the walls, right, we don't have anywhere to put our stuff. So we have to start from the bottom and build up. The black and white thumbnail is the foundation. This is where you get the composition in place, and this is where you get the shapes, and you make sure you have an interesting abstract design. So that's first. Composition or design comes first. The next step in the process is to assign each shape a value. So value is second. I'm going to keep it very simple and only use 4 values. So the whole idea is keeping this whole thing simple as long as I possibly can. So why 4 values? Now I have a little thing up here. I have all my, here we go. So if you're familiar with John Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting, he talks about the 4 values in the landscape. So he said basically for a good majority of landscapes, there's always exceptions as we know, you can simplify the landscape into just 4 values. And I love this idea because it really helps make doing the thumbnail for a landscape very easy. So what he tells us is the sky is always the lightest value. The upright planes are always the darkest. That would be tree trunks or the banks of the river. The flat ground is receiving the light. That would be a middle light value. And then the mountains or hills or any slanted planes are middle dark value. So that makes it very easy to translate your shapes and assign them a value with your value markers. Now this step is important to my process because I'm not going to look at my photo when I block in the painting. And this is how I work plein air as well. I don't look at the scene after I do the thumbnail. I block in the painting, then I look back at the scene, and then it's confined. So I don't end up putting in 25 more trees. So I work just from this simple black and white thumbnail. So the next step of the planning process, I'm not done yet planning. You know, it doesn't really take this long when you're doing it at home, is I pick out my colors. So first I address the composition, then I address the value plan, then I address the colors. Now for me this is the most important, well it's not the most important. See, the other 2 things are the most important. But a lot of times with pastels, the color seems to be the most important. We're drawn to the color, these wonderful pastels, but if you don't get the other first 2 correct, all the wonderful color in the world isn't going to make the painting hold together. So get those 2 first, then I pay attention to color. Well, what I like to do is I pick my colors in advance. So before I even start the painting, I have a big box at home in the studio, and they are organized by color and value, and I go through and mentally paint the scene and pull out the colors that I think I want to use. So I'll look at the photo and I'll say, okay, what do I need for the dark areas? What do I need for the light areas or the sky? And I pick out the sky colors. What do I need for the distant colors? Like I start in the back and work my way forward so that I can remember to create depth. I can remember the idea that I want to create that illusion of depth. And I'll just group the pastels by the element of the landscape. That's how I do it. So when I look at it, I know which element it belongs to. This way, when I go up to paint, and I don't have to talk about it. If I was at home, it would be different. I wouldn't have to explain what I'm doing. It allows me to let go. That's the letting go part. And the reason why it allows me to let go is I have the plan. I know the composition, I know what the values are, and I even know what colors I think I want to use. Now, it doesn't mean that I can't add more colors, although today this is all I brought, so I'm in trouble if it doesn't work out. But, yeah, I had to bring so much stuff with me. I had Betty, I sent her a box, and then I had Marcia Savage carry out a box, and I have 3 suitcases full of stuff. So it's been a challenge with all my stuff. So this is all I have. But I typically don't use much more than this for a single painting anyway, so that's not a surprise. But I can always add to it. If I add to it, I want to add them to this box or tray. I can always not use something that I picked out. But the idea is that I spend a little time visualizing what I want the painting to look like, what mood I'm going for, what color palette I want to achieve. Then I can paint, and here's the fun part of this. you're painting and you don't have to keep stopping to hunt for the right color or value. For me, that breaks the zone, right? I'm in this great place and all of a sudden it's, oh, I need something else for the sky and I've got to come and hunt through 5 or 6 boxes, and then that breaks that wonderful flow. So by having them all here, it really allows me to respond and have more fun with the way I make my marks and the way I express myself, not having to think about the logistics of what color I'm going to use. The first thing that I do is I have to choose the colors that are underneath, the block-in colors or underpainting colors. I'm going to keep it very simple. I'm going to pick one color, but I'm going to pick 4 values of that color. This is not the only way that I ever paint, but this is a simple way. I'd have the 6 steps to a pastel painting. It's just a very simple way to approach blocking in a painting. For this painting, I chose warm colors. So I chose like an orange, and I just chose 4 values of that orange. So dark, a light, and 2 middle values. All right, and you'll see when I start. I just want to go over all the things. All right, now I am actually ready for the painting. So I'm not going to look at the photo. I'm only going to look at the thumbnail, the black and white thumbnail. I'll have to move it as I go. I'm going to start by just doing a very simple drawing. I'm just using a pencil. I usually just use whatever's handy. So I'll start with the horizon line. And then I have this big tree shape, goes about here, and it goes a little bit under the horizon line. And then I have a smaller one that's behind that, and it goes about this far. It's slightly under the horizon line, right here. And I have another level, and that goes right about here. So those are those shapes here. Then I've got the sky. Now, I always ask myself, is it about the sky or is it about what's happening on the ground? And in this case, remember, it was about the flash of light. So it's going to be about what's happening here. So how can I use this big area of sky and make it interesting, but yet not too interesting? So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull some clouds down to my tree mat. So I'm making a couple lines here just to remind me to do that, so I don't forget. So that's the extent of the drawing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these 4 colors that I used, and I'm going to start to block them in just by looking at this little thumbnail. So I look and I say, okay, what are the dark shapes? Well, it's these trees. By the way, I'm working on UArt paper. It's 400 grit. And it's currently my go-to paper. And then this one back here is also dark. And this one's further back, so I don't want to make it quite as dark. Then I'm going to put in the lightest shape, which is the sky. So I have a lighter creamy color. I'm just going to put this up this right here, and I can see it.
Where you chose blocking in the trees, is that complementary color? Is that why you chose?
Oh, why did I choose that color? Okay. That's the question. I would love to be able to write a book on what underpainting colors we use for what subject, but there's not, right? There's no right answer and there's no wrong answer. And it just depends on what experience you have. So in other words, I chose warm colors because I want the warm glow. So I want the warm colors to come underneath. Yes, there's going to be green, so the complement will come into play, but more I chose it because I want to give a glow to hopefully get a glow. If I wanted it to be moody, I might choose purple. Here's a little example that I put together where I show, if you're not sure, you know, like your experience doesn't tell you, then do little color blocks. And these little color blocks will save you a lot of paper and aggravation and frustration. Say, I used the purple, put the colors I want on top, and I end up with a much more moodier feeling than with the warmer colors. So I would do these little color blocks to give me an idea without wasting a lot of paper. Sometimes I'll even do a little color study. So you can see here I tested out my colors on a smaller scale. That also saves me paper and saves me aggravation. So that's one way that you can get around guessing. Okay, darkest shape, lightest shape. So we have our middle value shape. So that's going to be the flat ground. Now I'm going to do something else though, and I want to talk about that. Then what we have are slanted plains or hillsides. Well, this is a marsh, so there are no slanted plains. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this distant tree line in with this middle dark value, just because I know it's not going to be as dark as these. And that will just help me. I'm going to do something else though. I'm going to darken the foreground. In fact, I'm going to take the darkest color and darken the foreground. That's not in my thumbnail, and I'm going to draw it up into the tree. It's not in my thumbnail, but it's a device that I want to use to make a little bit more mystery in my foreground. If I had it light all the way to the bottom, it might draw too much attention down there. So as you see, as I develop the painting, you'll understand hopefully more what I want to just keep it dark. And I'm going to leave it alone like that. I'm going to do another thing that's not in the thumbnail. I noticed that I wanted to bring some cloud shapes down into my trees. If I made it all light, I wouldn't remember that I wanted to do that. So I'm going to take this middle light value and put it in there. All right. Now, once I have it all blocked in, the next step that I like to take is I'm going to blend it all in. And I never blend except for on this part of the painting. Well, sometimes I'll blend a sky, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But what I want to do is blend it all in, and I have two reasons for blending it in. And I'm going to be using a piece of pipe insulation foam. So you know the foam you get for pipes to insulate them. I just get it and break them up into little pieces, like little brushes. They're cheap, although I do have a friend who puts them in the wash. So she gets all her dirty ones, she puts them in a net, throws them in the wash, and they're clean. Very thrifty. So, you know, it's the cheapest art supply you'll buy, but you can still save. So, I'm going to blend it all in. There's two reasons. The first reason is I want to start everything out in a nice, soft focus. Everything sort of mysterious and out of focus. That will allow me to decide what areas I want to give more clarity to, where I want to tighten it up, where I want to put the detail and the focus. The second reason that I like to blend in this first layer is because on UArt especially, I don't really care for the color of the paper, the light color of the paper peeking through. If I were working on a toned surface, that wouldn't be so bothersome. But when I have white or very, very light color peeking through, what I tend to do is put on too much pastel to cover up the white. And what happens there is you start trying to do it heavier because you got to get rid of all the little bits and specks, and you end up overworking the painting. It's not as fresh. So if I have this whole thing toned and I don't see the paper coming through, that will allow me to keep my marks and leave them alone and not get too fussy. One of the things that I like to do in this stage is to use the piece of foam as if it were a brush. So make the strokes go to help describe what it is I'm trying to suggest. So trees, I'll pull them up and down. And by the way, if this is on UArt paper, it would be just as easy for me to do this as a wet underpainting with alcohol or water or turpenoid. And I like to do that too. But for the sake of time and a demo, I'm showing you this process because I really like this process just as well as wet. You can start to pull some of the trees out, start to suggest some of the foliage. start to suggest some of the grasses, just by the way that I rub it in. And then when you're done with this stage, this is a really good time to stop and evaluate it and make sure that you're happy with the composition, with the design. Make sure that you're happy with the way you've set up your values, because it's a lot easier to make corrections, obviously, at this stage than when I started with the next layers. So, I'm ready to move on. Move that over. And where I start is with the darks. So now I can actually take out my photo. One of the things that you see here that I want to explain what this is the sun tool. So this reminds me where the sun is coming from. And it's really good. You know, they're easy to make. But it's a really good thing because especially when we're working with photos and we make changes, right? And then all of a sudden we lose sight of where the sun is and where the shadow should be, and you get confused. So the sun tool, you put it where the sun is supposed to go and you won't hopefully forget. So the sun is over here. And hopefully I'll remember where it is. But I want to put this up. I'm going to start with the dark shapes. So the dark shapes were the trees, okay? So I want to start and block in the trees, but I don't want to just stick with the local color of the trees. One of the beautiful things, as we know, of pastel is the ability we have to create layers of color. And if we stick with just the local color, it's not going to be as interesting. So I've got a little visual aid here. This shows a tree done just in local color. This is a tree done with a warm color underpainting. Same exact greens, but look at the difference of these greens when put on top of the red. So they're much more interesting, they're warmer, they're more lively. This works, but it's not going to be very interesting, especially on a larger scale. So I like to layer, and what I like to do is so that I remember that I want to layer like fine wine. So this is my visual aid for layering, especially with darks. So instead of picking one color for your dark, well, this is your cheap wine. It's just black. It's not very good, right? This is several layers, all the same value or very close in value. This allows a complex blend, right? It's much more interesting and exciting. The secret is just to make sure that the colors you choose are similar or very close in value, and then the eye will optically blend them, and it'll be a lot more interesting than just green. So I'm going to start with a dark purple, and I start every painting with a light touch. So I remind myself that for me, the way I like to work, the right touch is a light touch. And how I know it's a light enough touch is if I can see the color that's underneath. So if I can still see this underpainting color, then I know that I'm having a light enough touch. Just as an example, if I were to scrub it in and I can no longer see the red underneath, that's probably too heavy for this stage. I call that this is the whisper, and that's a shout. And I shout only when I know it's going to be the last layer that I put in. So if I know that I'm not going to put anything else on top, I'll go ahead and put a heavy or shouting mark. But for the most part, I leave those till the end of the painting. Another thing about the way that I like to make my marks is I like to think of my marks as they do two things. They help describe the subject that I'm painting, and they also help show emotion. So if I'm going to layer another layer of the red in here. This is my second layer of dark. It's not the same exact value, but it's close. It's a dark. I was saying something else, and then I changed it'll come back to me, hopefully. And I'm going to do a third layer. Sometimes I'll do 4, but I'm going to do 3 for today. This is the dark green. So I'm going to now put in the dark green. Oh yeah, I was talking about marks. So I'm trying to make my marks to help describe the shape of the tree or the foliage, trying to get that feeling of foliage. So I'm not painting up and down or side to side. I'm painting using the side of the pastel, trying to make marks that would mimic the way these trees are growing. And I'll show you, I'll do different types of marks in different places in the painting. Okay, so those are the dark areas. I'm going to pull a little bit of dark down in the foreground again. As I mentioned earlier, I want this dark, mysterious foreground. I changed the direction of my marks in the grass to go more up and down so that they would suggest the way the grasses are growing. So after I have the darks into place, the next thing that I want to concentrate on is the lights. And in a landscape, that's going to be the sky. Sky is usually always the lightest part of a landscape. And I like to address the sky at this stage in the painting because for me it sets the whole tone. It sets the mood, it sets the feeling, and if I can nail the sky, then it'll be a lot easier for me to continue with the rest of the painting. So what I want to do is start with the darkest color that I want to have up in the sky, and that is the darkest, this cloud bank. I'm going to pull that down in here. And when I come up to the trees, I'm going to start to carve into the tree with the sky color. So I consider the tree, this was one big shape. Now what I want to do is start to carve the shape and try to make it a little bit more interesting. So consider this like a lump of clay, and then this is a tool to start to carve. This pastel is going to start to carve into the tree to get those sky holes and to create a more interesting silhouette. All right, what else? There's some purple in that cloud bank, so I'll add that in. And there's some blue up there, but I want it to be a little bit lighter. And the idea of picking these colors in advance really helped me, especially if I didn't have to talk about what I was doing. Oh, that's okay. I just bought a whole bunch more last week. I'm not too worried about it. No.
What pastels are you using?
Oh, good question. It's just a mix of mostly Terry Ludwig. The big ones that I used in the beginning were Mount Vision and Diane Townsend soft form. It's just a mix. I like them all. That's the problem. So sometimes it's just finding the right color and value and not really being as concerned with it. But that's what I'm using here. And I was actually really good. I didn't buy that much.
Is the size of paper typical for what you work on?
Typically, this is what I use, 8 by 10, 5 by 7, just because for daily painting. But lately, I've been really enjoying painting big, and recently did 2 30 by 40 wildflower paintings, and I was in love. So I really, really enjoy the large. It's just obviously harder to store them and sell them and all that good stuff. So
But you get to buy more pastels.
yeah, I think I'm hooked. So that's a problem. So all I'm doing now is I'm taking those colors that I already pre-selected and making them work. And that's what I like to do, because then I will hopefully have better color harmony in the painting, because I'm taking what's here and using those same colors all over the painting instead of just jumping around to color after color. And in my demo at IAPS, I gave the example of why I do this way, is going and standing in front of Terry Ludwig's booth with your empty box. And having to fill the empty box. Now, you go in with probably your list, or maybe your color swatches. That's what I've done in the past. But when I get there, everything goes right out the window. And I end up with just the colors that I am drawn to. They're my favorite colors, or they're the bright colors. And they're not the colors that I actually really need. And so by picking my colors in advance like this, I'm not tempted by all 500 colors in my box, or however many there are. I have to stick with this and make it work for the most part, and that really results in usually in a better painting. So that's really one of the reasons. It's helping me have self-control.
About how many pastels are in that small box?
I'll have to count them, but probably 30, 40, something like that. That's typical. And what I do at home is if I'm doing a painting, I will pick this out, do a painting, and then before I put them back, I will usually do a few more paintings with that same palette, different subject matter, just to play with it and just to see how far I can push it. And then I'll say, okay, now it's time to put them back and start over again. So that's how I like to do it. So, all right, sky. So I get all the colors in. Sometimes I'll leave it like this, if I just want to have it raw, if I want to have it with, movement. Sometimes I will blend it. And I'll show you for the sake of today's demo how I would blend it. Couple of ways. If I have a really big painting, I'll use the side of my palm. And I'll just sort of sweep. And you have to clean your brush in between. or else it doesn't work. And I'll just kind of sweep these layers together. And another way that I'll do it, and I'll show you up at the top, especially if I have a smaller painting, I'll take a pinky and I'll just let it dance across the surface like this. And that sort of mingles the layers together without crushing it too much. When you crush the crystals in the pastel, it tends to look dull, which is why I really don't like to blend. But sometimes if you need a calmer looking sky, I'll do it. What I'll often do though is I'll come back with the pastel, with the fresh pastel, and then just freshen it up a little bit. And then you have the best of both worlds. You have it blended, and then you have a little bit of fresh pastel on top, like that. So then, when I've got the sky, how I think I like it, and of course I can always go back, what I like to do next is just take and work my way from the back to the front. And the reason why I like to do it that way is it reminds me to create depth or aerial perspective. So it reminds me that what is back here cannot be the same as back here. Even if it's green, this is how probably one of the earliest things I ever learned about pastel and creating depth was someone told me, well, if you use a stick of pastel in the foreground, you should not use it in the background. You can change the color or the value of it, right? But you can't use the same exact one. So if I were to use this bright warm green back here, I could use green back here, but I'd have to change it somehow. And so I call that change your stick rule. And it reminds me that I'm not going to put pastel color down here and use the same one in the back, which will tend to flatten it out. I want to change it somehow. So working back to front helps me do that. So I have my distant blue in here for this far little piece of tree line. And as it's further back, it's going to have less detail. So just going to whisper it on, sort of pull up some to suggest that there are some trees back there, but I'm not going to paint leaves, I'm not going to put trunks, I'm not going to do anything like that. Then I've got my next layer. This one's going to be a little bit darker. I can see a little bit more detail in this layer. This is a little bit closer to us. I'm going to mix a couple of these blues in here. Started with the darker one. And then it sneaks behind these trees. Whenever I get that opportunity to sneak a layer behind another layer, I try to take advantage of that so that way I can create a little bit more depth. So I'm putting some of that color here to help bring this one forward a little bit more. All right. Now this layer has more green in it, so I'm going to start to add some of the green. And I want to put it everywhere. Remember the sun tool, I have to remember where the sun was coming in, and there's some areas that had some more sunlight and had a little bit of a warmth to it. So I want to keep that in mind as I create these trees. Gradually giving it some of that sunlight. Darken this back behind the trees. I'm getting ready to put in some of the trunks, so I want to create some of that mystery that's back down here at the base of the trees. And let's see, let's address some of the green. I put that green in there already. Now in the distance, there's a couple of ways that I like to work this. I want the flash. Remember, that was my why. That was what was most important. But I don't want to put that in until the end. That's like the icing on the cake. So I want to put in some dirt first. So I'm going to layer in some of this rusty color first. And I think of this as my dirt. If anything is growing, it has to have dirt underneath. So that reminds me that I want to put in some dirt. And then when I just glanced up here, I realized that I have one big solid shape of trees. So I have to remember that I have to carve into these trees to start to give them some separation. So I take that background sky color and start to carve them up a little bit more than I had so that they're not just one big lump. So while I like to work from front to back, if I find an area that I want to address, a lot of times I'll go and do it before I forget. So carving some of these trees right now, and then I'll come back. So I've got my dirt. I want to darken this foreground even a little bit more. And I'm going to show you a little device that I like to use for foregrounds. I'm going to darken some of these tree areas just a little bit more. Add a little bit more of the greens. And let's see. Now what I want to do is start to create this light. Now, in talking about how I make the strokes, if I want to have something look like it's going back in the distance, I'm going to make horizontal bands, narrow horizontal bands. Yes, it's grass and it's growing up and down like grass, but we wouldn't see that far back. So I want to cut into it. It has to go right about here. Now I'm going to shout, so I'm going to press a lot harder. So there's my band, and it stops right here. Then it's not quite as bright right in here. still have narrow horizontal bands. There's some green worked in there. As I come forward, though, I'm going to start to change the direction of my strokes. And I'm going to start to make my strokes go more like grass, more up and down. As I can see them, they're up close. And then it starts to go over here, and again, I'm going to shout. And I'll just press a lot harder. And there's also some of that warm going on in the trees, all right? But in order for me to get that, I'm going to just very lightly spray it with some workable fixative and spray the foreground. And we're going to let it dry for a minute. What I want to do is get this a little bit darker than it is. So I don't mind that the fixative darkened it, because what I'm going to do is come back over it with some of the grass colors, and if it works, hopefully it will skip over and create the illusion of texture so that I don't have to paint every single blade of grass, that I can suggest some of the grasses by the way the pastel will skip over.
So are you saying that fixative creates a texture?
Yeah, it's very subtle, and on some of these you can see it. If you were to come up close. And that's where I sprayed it and then go back over it. It skips over and leaves the dark underneath. And I like just that it gives sort of an illusion of stuff without painting stuff. So it's kind of a fun thing to do.
And we still see it shiny like that. Is it dry or?
It's not dry. When it's shiny, that means I put it on too thick right there. So gotta wait a little bit longer. If you put it on too thick, then it gets too slick, and then the pastel won't go on top. So there's sort of a fine line that you have to experiment with. So I'm going to let it dry so I don't see it anymore. And while I let it dry, I'm going to start to carve a little bit more. And I can also start to create some of those tree trunks that I see. And they are more kind of like, that might be too light. Let's try this one. So I'm just going to drag the pastel to create a suggestion of some of the lighter tree trunks that are getting kissed by that sunlight that we had established. And maybe some have just even more sunlight, so I take that golden color and just put it on some of those. Then there's some fun stuff happening. There's some dead trees coming up. So I'm going to take pastel, dark blue, and drag it on there to create some of those dead looking snags right in there. Just drag it down in front, and hopefully that'll give a little bit more depth. And this flash of light actually is going behind those trees, so I can sneak it back there a little bit more. One thing about marshland that I've learned is you really have to make it perfectly straight and level. If it wavers even just a tiny bit, it won't look like a marsh. So you have to be careful to do that. Let's pull out another snag over here. And now this is dry, so we can address this foreground stuff. So I want to make some grassy stuff without painting blades of grass. So I'm going to just take the green and pull it, and see it skips over the dark, leaves the dark in place. And gives sort of just the illusion of stuff happening without having to paint a lot of stuff. So it's just kind of a fun thing to do. There's a couple other things that you can do. I said I was going to show you with the banker's clip. One way that you can create sort of an illusion of texture or stuff happening, you have to have enough layers. But you can take the clip and just drag it through, kind of like scratch art. It works really nice if you're trying to create currents in water, to just drag this clip through. And it just reveals the layers underneath. Again, if I had developed more layers, it would be even more interesting that way. And you can use the clip if you need to straighten out lines. So if I didn't get that right, instead of adding more pastel, which tends to make things grow, why not remove some? So you just take the clip and you can scratch back, and it's kind of like you can have surgery with it. You can, another thing you can do is, let me see that, a stainless steel pin. And if you're working on a smaller scale, that does the same thing. So you can scratch away areas that you don't want, rather, like if I really wanted to get, what if I didn't want that white? I can just make it disappear. But if I like it, I can put it back. But I can scratch it away and straighten it out.
Does that ever affect the sanding surface of the board?
I've never had a problem with it. I'm not pressing that hard. Yeah. So that's a fun tool that you can use. But basically, at this point, we talk about adding spices. Okay, so when I get to this point in a painting, I've gone through my steps. So I've made the plan, I've planned out the value study, I've done the underpainting colors. And by the way, this is another, just to show you an example of another painting, the value study, the block-in colors, the color study. That's just another painting that I did. I block it in, I rub it all in, I start with my darks, and then I go from the top to the bottom, basically. But when I get to this point in a painting, this is where I usually stop and take a break, get a drink, come back with my board and say, okay, what do I need to do? Where do I need to add those spices? Now, spices to me are those finishing marks that help lead the viewer's eye around the painting. So I don't want to just go in there and make a bunch of marks for the sake of making marks. At this point, every single mark that I want to make has to have a purpose. I have to know why I'm doing it. And sometimes you don't know right away. Sometimes it will be after the demo that I'll come back and say, oh, you messed up. You have to think about it. You have to take time away from it. Spices can be a color, like a bolder color, a brighter color, something more intense. It could be a contrast, so a dark against a light. It could be a bolder mark. So if you have nice whispery strokes, a touch of a bolder mark could be that spice. Something that allows the viewer to come and say, oh, okay, I like that. That's a little bit of eye candy. And then move the viewer to the next one and to the next one, ultimately leading them around the entire painting. So designing the painting and placing those final marks so that you're in control of where you want the eye to go. And so for me, spices are those marks. And I know that spices, if you put too much spice in a food, what happens? It's not good. Same with a painting. And I heard this recently, and I love this. When you're working on a painting and you're at the end and you're doing all these final marks, and I don't know if this ever happened to you, but I know it has to me. You're painting, but no one's home. Where you're painting and you're not even aware of what you're doing. And before you know it, you finished it off. So make sure you're home when you're making those final marks. When you're putting in your spices, pay attention and know why. Why are you doing them? And I gotta take a drink. So looking at this, if I were to have to make last minute, on the spot decisions about where the spices would go, I would say that this is going to be my focal area. I've designed, more water. I've designed the clouds to lead me to that area. So I need to refine this area a little bit more. I also could do something with the foreground to create some little spots that might help walk the viewer into the painting a little bit more. So little bits, that one might not work. Oh, let's try this. This is an iridescent. And I don't know if you can see it from where you are, but when you move it in the light, it's just little jewels. And that, just something subtle like that. I'm not going to get carried away with it. I got to make sure that this is showing enough. And I think it is. I think I could probably adjust this tree line a little bit more. And maybe even soften it to push it back. So I'll just take my finger and soften it slightly. And I could add a little bit more of the light coming back behind the tree. Like that. And use a shouting mark. When I shout, I usually drop them and they usually explode. So I'm used to that. That doesn't bother me.
We've all been there.
Yeah. So anyways. So those are the kind of things I would do. I might need to pull out some more of the foliage so that it's not so flat. Right now it's a little bit flat. So if I take some of this green and skip it over here, I can add a little bit more, pull out some of the foliage so it's coming forward slightly and not just a big flat mass. But I will stop because you really have to stop at this point and evaluate it. And that's been hard for me because I do 10-minute paintings, 15-minute paintings. So I paint fast. So I paint slow, fast, slow, meaning slow, make a plan, fast, let yourself go and just respond and play, have fun with it, but then slow back down. And take your time to decide where those spices are going to go, where those final marks are going to go, and not rush the end of a painting, but really try to have patience. And that's a hard thing for me to do. So I'm going to stop, but I have a couple of minutes, and what I wanted to just review very quickly are some of the ways that I have found that have helped me, let me just put this like this, that have helped me paint with more expression or loosen up. So the first one I already went over, that is rethinking the way I use my reference photos. So working small, working from something that allows me to interpret it and not copy it. My favorite quote from Degas is, "When in front of nature, one must still compose." So I don't mind moving a tree if it's going to make a better composition. I don't feel that I have to copy it. But rethinking not only reference photos, but when you're out painting plein air. If you need to move a tree or do something, it's okay if it's going to make a better painting, if it's going to express how you really feel about what you're doing. Number 2, adopt a what-if attitude. So for me, that means not being afraid of the paper. Thinking outside the box. If things aren't going the way I want, I'm not afraid to brush it out or to spray it or to try. I say to myself, well, what if I did this? Or what if I tried this new eraser and made tree trunks, right? So I'm always trying to think of ways to help me move beyond the fear of ruining it. I don't care about that, it's just paper. Number 3, organize your supplies. Now, this is hard for me because, and I don't know about you, but when I think I was in middle school, my mom gave me a plaque. It said, "Creative minds are rarely tidy." So she was giving me a clue that I wasn't very tidy. I had projects going on everywhere. But one thing that I do try to do is keep my pastels and my paper organized. So at home, they are in a box. They're organized by color and value so that I can paint more quickly and more intuitively. I don't have to go through 5 or 6 different boxes to find the right color or value. They're all there. They're all handy. My paper is on a rack. It's cut. It's ready to go. So I don't have to waste time, precious time, setting up to paint. It's there. It's ready for me. So that helps me. And then number 4, and these are not in any particular order, is study. So when I first began painting, I really knew nothing about painting. I didn't know about composition or value or color theory or any of that. I had to learn all that. So I've made a conscious effort to study, to take the best workshops, to go to IAPS, to do all these things so that I could understand what I was doing. So I encourage you to find out if you have weak areas, learn, study. We have so many resources, books, DVDs, you name it. It's available to us. I like to take a topic every month and say, this month I'm going to focus on value, let's just say, and I read all I can about it. But I caution you that we can study too much. And if you're familiar with Robert Jen's letter, he once wrote about this problem. And this is the problem where we study too much, but we don't paint enough. And he called it educosis. I love this because it happens, right? We study and then we're still frustrated with our paintings, but we don't take the time in front of the easel to paint as much as we can. Because it takes the practice to take what we are learning, what we know, to become intuitive. If we don't practice, it never can just flow. So study. And then 5, paint often. That's the best advice that I can give you. That's not only is it fun, it's helpful. So I challenge you, I like to do this, let's do this, 25 small paintings. You don't have to do them every day, but let's just cap it at 6 weeks, that way you'll be encouraged. You can set a timer for 21 minutes. So, what did I say, 25? 25 minutes. 25 minutes, stop. Really 10 is good. In my students, we do 7-minute paintings. And those are the best. Those are the best paintings anyone does because you don't have to stop and think too much. But if you do this, I promise you that they say it takes 21 days to make a habit, right? If you can make that a habit, even if it's just your warm-up, just imagine how much better you're going to be in 21 days. So I leave you with that, and I want to thank you very much for inviting me and giving this opportunity to share with you today. I should have said, if anyone have any questions before I ended my thing, but if I'm open for any questions if you want to ask me. So, but I'll be here cleaning up if you have anything to ask. Thank you.